Your dream home in Florida could be sitting on radioactive waste. And right now, in January 2026, Florida politicians are about to make sure you can't do anything about it. Welcome to the dirtiest real estate scandal the Sunshine State has ever seen. Behind the palm trees and perfect lawns, hundreds of thousands of Florida homes, parks, and communities are built on former phosphate mining land contaminated with uranium and radium. Families are living in trailer parks with elevated radiation levels. Kids are playing soccer on fields constructed over toxic mining waste. Homebuyers are closing on properties with zero disclosure about what's buried beneath their foundations. And the mining giant responsible, Mosaic Company, a Fortune 500 corporation, just paid off politicians to pass a bill that shields them from lawsuits. House Bill 167 is heading for a vote this month. If it passes, homeowners who discover their properties are radioactive will have almost no legal recourse. This isn't a future threat. It's happening now. And if you're buying, selling, or investing in Florida real estate, you need to understand what's at stake. Hit subscribe to Housing Intel and ring that bell for data-driven real estate intelligence that exposes what others won't touch. And drop a comment below. Where are you watching from? Are you in Florida, or do you know someone dealing with contamination issues? Let's talk about it because this affects millions of property owners across the state. The scale of Florida's phosphate mining legacy is staggering. Over 450,000 acres of Florida land, approximately 700 square miles, have been mined for phosphate. That's an area larger than the entire city of Jacksonville. Most of this mining happened in a crescent stretching from Polk County south through Hardee, Manatee, and Hillsborough counties, the interior region southeast of Tampa Bay. The Mosaic Company alone controls 368,000 acres in Florida, more land than the entire state of Rhode Island. About half of that, roughly 184,000 acres, has already been mined and officially classified as reclaimed or recovered. Here's the problem. Phosphate mining doesn't just dig up rocks. The process brings radioactive materials, uranium and radium, that were originally 20 to 50 feet below the surface, up much closer to ground level. When companies finish mining and reclaim the land, that radiation doesn't disappear. It stays there, permanently. And what happens to this reclaimed land? It gets sold. It becomes neighborhoods, golf courses, trailer parks, public parks, schools, soccer fields, playgrounds, residential subdivisions where families buy homes, raise children, and build equity, all without knowing what's underneath. According to investigative reporting, the Mosaic Company sold a golf resort built on former mining land for $160 million in 2023. Buyers paid premium prices for what looked like pristine Florida real estate. But there was no mandatory disclosure about the land's mining history, no warning about potential radiation exposure, no testing required before the sale. This pattern repeats across Central Florida. Thousands of properties sit on reclaimed phosphate land, and the overwhelming majority of owners have no idea. Real estate transactions in Florida don't require sellers or developers to disclose if land was previously mined. There's no database, no public registry, no warning signs. You could buy a $500,000 home, move your family in, and only discover years later that you're living on top of radioactive mining waste. And here's where it gets worse. When homeowners do find out and try to hold mining companies accountable, they face an uphill legal battle. Until now, Florida's Water Quality Assurance Act provided something called strict liability. That meant if contamination from mining operations damaged your property, the mining company was automatically responsible. You didn't have to prove they were negligent or careless. You just had to prove the contamination existed and came from their operation. It was one of the few legal protections Florida homeowners had. But in January 2026, that protection is about to be stripped away. House Bill 167, sponsored by Representative Lawrence McClure, and its Senate companion, SB 832, sponsored by Senator Danny Burgess, are moving through the Florida Legislature right now. These bills specifically target phosphate mining operations and remove strict liability protections. If HB 167 passes, homeowners who discover their properties are contaminated will face a much higher legal bar. They'll have to prove the mining company was negligent, that they knowingly or recklessly caused the contamination. That's an incredibly difficult standard to meet, especially when you're going up against a Fortune 500 corporation with unlimited legal resources. But the bill goes even further. It creates an additional requirement. Before a property owner can even file a lawsuit, they must conduct a radiation survey of their land at their own expense. And here's the catch. To do that survey, they need access to the property. If the mining company denies access or delays the process, the homeowner is stuck. They can't get the data they need to prove contamination, which means they can't file the lawsuit. It's a legal trap designed to make litigation nearly impossible. Reagan Whitlock, Florida director at the Center for Biological Diversity, put it bluntly. This bill would essentially let polluters off the hook while forcing victims to prove wrongdoing, a much harder standard to meet. And it's not just about legal theory. Real families are already fighting these battles. In 2020, 2 mobile homeowners in Hillsborough County filed a lawsuit against Mosaic, alleging that their properties were exposed to dangerous levels of radiation from nearby phosphate mining operations. The case was strong enough that a judge denied Mosaic's motion to dismiss. That meant the homeowners had a viable claim. Mosaic could be held accountable. But instead of settling or cleaning up the contamination, Mosaic went to the legislature. According to documents filed with the Securities and Exchange Commission, Mosaic alerted investors about the lawsuit and pledged to vigorously defend against it. And defend they did, not in court, but in the Capitol. Mosaic hired half a dozen registered lobbyists to push HB 167 through the Florida House and Senate. The bill sailed through committee after committee in late 2025. Every Republican voted yes, every Democrat voted no, and now it's heading for a final floor vote in January 2026, just weeks away. The timing of political donations tells the story. According to investigative journalist Jason Garcia, Senator Danny Burgess received a $10,000 contribution from Mosaic just 4 days before he filed SB 832. 4 days. That's not coincidence. That's a transaction. Representative Lawrence McClure, the House sponsor, has his own history with Mosaic. In 2023, McClure sponsored a separate bill that allowed the use of phosphogypsum, a radioactive byproduct of phosphate mining, in road construction. Shortly after that bill passed, Mosaic hosted a fundraiser for McClure. The pattern is clear. Mosaic donates. Politicians introduce bills that protect Mosaic. Those bills pass, and Florida homeowners lose legal protections. Let's be absolutely clear about what Mosaic is protecting itself from. This isn't just about 2 mobile homeowners in Hillsborough County. It's about a potential tidal wave of litigation across Central Florida, 368,000 acres. 184,000 acres already reclaimed and developed. Thousands of homes, schools, parks, and commercial properties potentially sitting on contaminated land. If strict liability remains in place, Mosaic could face billions of dollars in lawsuits, property damage claims, health-related settlements, and cleanup costs. Changing the law isn't about fairness or legal reform. It's about financial survival for a corporation that knowingly sold and developed radioactive land without disclosure. And it's working. HB 167 has already passed the House Commerce Committee, the Civil Justice Subcommittee, and the Regulatory Reform and Economic Development Subcommittee. It's on track for a full House vote this month. If it passes, Governor Ron DeSantis is expected to sign it. After all, DeSantis has been friendly to the phosphate industry throughout his tenure. In 2023, his administration and the legislature approved $20 million in public funding to research the extraction of rare earth metals from phosphate mining waste. They also green-lighted the use of phosphogypsum in road construction, despite the material being radioactive and banned for most uses by the Environmental Protection Agency. The relationship between Florida politicians and the phosphate industry isn't new. It's decades old. But it's reaching a critical point in 2026 because the consequences are becoming impossible to ignore. Public health researchers have raised alarms about elevated radiation levels in communities near former mining sites. A lawsuit in Alabama against Drummond Company, another mining giant, alleged similar contamination and radiation exposure. That case settled before reaching a verdict, but it established that these claims are serious and viable. In Florida, very little recent public research has been conducted on the long-term health impacts of living on reclaimed phosphate land. There are no longitudinal studies tracking cancer rates, respiratory illnesses, or developmental issues in children who grow up playing on these properties. There's no statewide testing program, no mandatory health screenings, no public warnings. Mosaic and other mining companies have quietly reclaimed land, sold it for development, and moved on. The contamination stays, the families stay, and the health risks accumulate over years and decades. For real estate investors and homebuyers, this creates a catastrophic blind spot. You can't see radiation, you can't smell it, you can't taste it. A property can look perfect, pristine landscaping, beautiful home, great schools nearby, and still be sitting on contaminated soil. And if HB 167 passes, your legal options for recourse will evaporate. Here's what this means in practical terms for the Florida housing market. First, property values in affected areas will become impossible to accurately assess. If buyers start becoming aware of phosphate contamination risks, demand will crater. Homes in Polk, Hillsborough, Hardee, and Manatee counties could see significant devaluation, especially in areas near known former mining sites. Second, title insurance and disclosure issues will explode. If contamination becomes a known issue on a property, future buyers will demand disclosure. Sellers who failed to disclose could face fraud claims. Title companies may refuse to insure properties with mining history. The entire transaction process will become a legal minefield. Third, financing will become difficult. Lenders don't want to hold mortgages on properties that could become unsellable due to contamination. If radiation issues become public knowledge, banks may require extensive testing before approving loans, adding costs and delays to transactions. Fourth, the rental market will suffer. Landlords who own properties on former mining land could face tenant lawsuits if health issues arise. Insurance premiums will skyrocket or become unavailable entirely. Some properties may become effectively unleasable. And fifth, this creates a long-term economic liability for the entire region. Central Florida's economy depends heavily on real estate, tourism, agriculture, and population growth. If word spreads that hundreds of thousands of acres are radioactive, that perception alone will devastate property values, economic development, and migration patterns. Mosaic knows all of this. That's why they're spending heavily on lobbying and political donations. That's why they need HB 167 to pass. Because once the floodgates open and homeowners start filing lawsuits, the financial exposure could be catastrophic. A single class action lawsuit covering even 10% of the 184,000 reclaimed acres could cost billions. Individual property damage claims could add up to tens of millions more. Health-related lawsuits, if cancer clusters are ever definitively linked to radiation exposure, could dwarf even those numbers. Changing the liability standard from strict to negligence-based reduces Mosaic's exposure by an estimated 80 to 90%. It's not about justice. It's about protecting the bottom line, and Florida politicians are helping them do it. If you're watching this from Florida, ask yourself, do you know if your property was ever mined? Have you tested your soil for radiation? Do you know where the nearest former phosphate mine is located? Most people don't, and that's by design. The phosphate industry has operated with minimal oversight, virtually no public transparency, and zero mandatory disclosure requirements for decades. They've made billions of dollars extracting Florida's natural resources, and when the land is exhausted, they sell it for development, pass the risk to homeowners, and walk away. The Mosaic Company reported over $10 billion in revenue in 2024. They're one of the world's largest producers of phosphate and potash. They operate massive mines across Florida, producing the fertilizers that feed global agriculture. But the cost of that production is borne by Florida's land, water, and people. Phosphate mining leaves behind enormous waste piles called gypsum stacks, some over 200 feet tall, filled with radioactive byproducts. These stacks sit across central Florida, vulnerable to hurricanes, heavy rains, and structural failures. When a gypsum stack fails, it can release hundreds of millions of gallons of contaminated wastewater into the environment. That's exactly what happened at Piney Point in 2021, when 215 million gallons of polluted water were dumped into Tampa Bay to prevent a catastrophic collapse. The disaster killed fish, triggered toxic algae blooms, and contaminated coastal ecosystems. It cost Florida taxpayers over $100 million in emergency response and cleanup. And Mosaic wasn't even the operator at Piney Point. That was HRK Holdings, a smaller company that went bankrupt. But the infrastructure, the risk, and the legacy of contamination are identical across dozens of other sites operated by Mosaic and other companies. Every storm season, every hurricane, every heavy rain event is a potential trigger for another disaster. And homeowners living near these sites have no legal protections if their properties are damaged or contaminated. In 2025, Mosaic proposed a new wastewater disposal plan. They want to inject millions of gallons of contaminated water 8,000 feet underground at sites in Plant City, Riverview, Mulberry, and Bartow. The wastewater comes from gypsum stacks and is highly acidic and radioactive. Mosaic claims the injection will be safe, that the water will stay contained in deep underground formations far below drinking water aquifers. Environmental groups are skeptical. They point out that Florida's geology is porous limestone riddled with underground caves, sinkholes, and aquifer connections. Injecting toxic wastewater into that system is a gamble with unpredictable long-term consequences. If contamination migrates upward into drinking water aquifers, it could affect millions of people across Central Florida. And if that happens, homeowners will have no one to sue because HB 167 will have already passed. Mosaic is also pushing to open the first new phosphate mine in decades in DeSoto County. The project was rejected in 2018 due to environmental concerns, but the company is trying again, backed by political allies and promises of economic development. The mine would disturb thousands of additional acres, creating more gypsum stacks, more wastewater, and more long-term contamination risk. And once the phosphate is gone, that land will be reclaimed, sold, and developed, just like the 368,000 acres Mosaic already controls. The cycle repeats. The profits go to shareholders. The risks stay with Florida families. Here's the bottom line. Florida's 2026 mining bill, HB 167, is a direct attack on property rights and public health. It protects corporate polluters at the expense of homeowners. It makes it nearly impossible to hold mining companies accountable for contamination. And it's being pushed through the legislature right now, in January 2026, by politicians who received thousands of dollars in campaign contributions from Mosaic just days before filing the bills. This is corruption in plain sight. If you're buying property in Central Florida, you need to do your homework. Research the land's history. Look for former mining sites. Demand radiation testing before closing. Hire environmental consultants. Don't rely on standard disclosures because they won't tell you what you need to know. If you already own property in Polk, Hillsborough, Manatee, or Hardee counties, consider getting your soil tested independently. Document everything. If contamination is present, consult with an environmental attorney before HB 167 becomes law, because once it passes, your legal options will be severely limited. If you're an investor, understand that this issue will increasingly affect property values, insurance availability, and marketability in affected regions. The smart money is paying attention. The uninformed are walking into a trap. And if you're a Florida voter, contact your representatives. Tell them to vote no on HB 167 and SB 832. Demand transparency. Demand mandatory disclosure of mining history in real estate transactions. Demand independent health studies on reclaimed mining land. Because this isn't just about one bill. It's about whether Florida homeowners have any protection against corporate polluters who profit from contaminating your land and then buy politicians to escape responsibility. The vote is happening this month. The outcome will affect hundreds of thousands of properties and millions of Floridians for decades to come. This is the kind of real estate intelligence that changes how you invest, where you buy, and how you protect your family. If this breakdown opened your eyes, smash that like button right now. Subscribe to Housing Intel for fearless data-driven real estate analysis that cuts through the noise and exposes what the industry doesn't want you to know. And tell us in the comments, are you in Florida? Do you live near former mining sites? Have you tested your property for contamination? We want to hear your story. Because the more people who understand what's happening, the harder it becomes for politicians and corporations to get away with it. We'll see you in the next video, where we'll break down exactly which Florida counties are most at risk and what homeowners can do to protect themselves. Because sometimes the most dangerous investment isn't the market crash you see coming. It's the radioactive land you never knew you were standing on.